We're all gathered here for a lecture of the gift by Foundation for Creative Social Research titled Celebrate the Idea of the Public, the Serve of Philosophy Behind Free Vaccines. The vaccine policy transitioned a week back in the country, which was accompanied by the public announcement by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. An essential thing as the free vaccine for everybody must have been the top priority of the central government. Sadly, it wasn't so. Even with the announcement of the Mahatika Utsav, the new liberal policies where private purchasing of vaccines has not been stopped but replaced with a quota. Those who ritually chant Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, let all be happy, yet practice unequal policies and behavior in reality, and consistently advance the interest of the few through policies of privatization. I'm honored to introduce the speaker for today, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty. Belated happy birthday, sir. A teacher, researcher, writer, political scientist, China scholar, and peace and human rights activist. He has many books and research papers on theoretical and empirical dimensions of social movements, human rights, developmental studies, and global transformation. After retiring from the University of Delhi, he has been with the Council for Social Development and is the editor for the CST journal Social Change. He is also Chairperson Development Research Institute Bhubaneswar, Honorary Fellow Institute of Chinese Studies Delhi, and Fellow at Orfalea Center for Global and International Studies UC Santa Barbara. Before I invite Professor Mohanty to speak, I would request the audience to switch off your cameras and microphones while the speaker is speaking. I would also request everyone to write their email IDs on the chat box so we can keep you updated with the future programs organized by FCSR. Thank you. And now I invite Professor Mohanty to start the lecture. Thank you, sir. Sir, I think you're muted.
Two corrections. I'm no longer the editor of Social Change.
Okay.
From April onwards, Dr. Riaz Ahmad, who had joined me as associate editor 15 years ago and was with me for 3 years, he has now taken over as the editor of Social Change, and I have been promoted as a member of the advisory editorial board. Okay. The other correction is I have also retired as honorary fellow of the Institute of Chinese Studies as of last March, I think, again April. And they have informed me that they have accepted my request, and so I will hereafter be emeritus fellow or something like that. Because I thought this group should know that there are some retirements also. Now, I'm sorry, I invited this discussion. I don't know whether everybody knows this. And I may have invited some trouble with this, but because I hope to have enough energy to speak for about half an hour to 40 minutes. Priyanka, Sakshi, please stop me. First warn me when it is half an hour and absolutely stop me at 40 minutes, okay? If you don't, then I will stop myself when I realize I'm over-speaking, or I'm so tired that I will drop off right here. So, okay. As Sakshi introduced the theme, and I think most of you would have seen the little abstract. I was hoping to write up the full paper, but nowadays, indeed, my energy is very limited. So I haven't been able to write the full paper. But I have some notes based on which I will speak. And this is something many of us, political theorists, have been thinking, working directly or indirectly, the whole question of public versus private. in one form or the other. The notion of the public good, the notion of the commons, the notion of the public interest, and so on. But what is very, very striking is, and those of you who may have read my uh, short article in Social Change soon after the first few months of the pandemic, in the June 2020 issue, that COVID-19 highlights big, big gaps. It highlights fault lines. It highlights, great fault lines in the contemporary world. There were rising inequalities on many fronts, decline of publicness, steady and fast decline of publicness all over in all spheres. And the third was over-concentration of power, centralization of many kinds, political, economic, communication, and so on. This talk is a follow-up to some extent, but I'm provoked by the very late announcement, which I would say very gingerly announcement, by the Prime Minister of India, that there would be free vaccine to all. Actually, it's not even so, as Sakshi pointed out. 25% has been given to the private, who will charge, of course, a limited fee, but why? Why should they charge? They should have been just institutions or channeling this vaccine. In other words, from day one, that is January 2020, when the world was cognizant of the pandemic, they should have seen the need for several public measures, including a vaccine, or because the research was expedited then on, and whenever the vaccine would be available, it will be made available to all citizens of all countries, and that would have been the case. And gradually you saw how, in reality, the management of this pandemic generated problems required the whole state apparatus, not only the central government in India or in any country, just the central government, but all layers of government, right down to the grassroots level, the villages, panchayats in India, the wards in the cities, and so on. And those of you who have closely watched the Kerala experience or the Bombay Municipal Corporation experience, that how every ward had a control room, and they managed in the last few months to control this early period of the second wave very effectively. In other words, all the layers of administration and state governments played an exceedingly important role. And the tragedy is the resources are concentrated at the center in India. And in various ways, it varies from country to country, but resources are concentrated. But the actual confrontation with the crisis takes place at every level, and finally with the lowest level, where women in all parts of the world played a very important role, especially in India. But I want to come to the theoretical implications, and I don't want to spend too much time on how really the public institutions got activated. Though this is the time when, paradoxically enough, neoliberal reforms were unleashed in a expeditious way in India a year ago and recently and continuously. And very proudly, the central government leaders particularly the Prime Minister, claiming that, India's reform process was going on. And Europe, where they have overcome the second wave somewhat and relaxed, are almost returning back to normal kind of thing. So is also in the United States. This back to business as usual. In other words, neoliberal capitalism in full swing. Even in China, where the system helped them to implement certain policies, including the lockdown and distributive policies more effectively than in all other countries. But what was their objective and what are they busy with now with their neoliberal development under the Communist Party leadership as they're approaching the celebration on the 1st of July, the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China. So all over the world, neoliberal capitalism is in full swing despite the corona challenge, despite the fact that they indeed needed publicness, public resources, public intervention, public action, which doesn't mean centralized action, but coordinated, interdependent, mutually interdependent action from central level to the grassroots level, all level proving themselves to be inevitable and important. In fact, that is why I would, I would move in the direction of ultimately saying that this is really the Ubuntu concept of the public, the mutuality concept of the public, the interdependent concept of the public, which was proved. So that is the argument. And the context is the COVID experience. I will now take up 4 questions and see how political theorists in particular and knowledge practitioners in general in all fields and action as well as deliberation and writing, pedagogy included, that is teachers included, how have they dealt with this question of the public? From colonial times to neo-colonial and now neoliberal times, how public has been continuously derided and private has been elevated to a high pedestal, and so much so that monopolies are now celebrated. Not even those who have read C. Wright Mills' Power Elite, showing how the 19th century capitalism was, small-scale capitalism, anti-monopoly, antitrust capitalism. And in India, we had a Monopoly Restrictive Act, which has been abolished. So, let alone monopoly, now that it's an age of mergers. From colonial times till today, how the private has been elevated. Now, the philosophical, and the 4 questions I'll come to in a moment, the philosophical question is, and this is something which I will not dwell upon today, but some of you should pursue this. What is claimed to be private is actually not private. So the boundary between private and public is very fuzzy in various layers. Is family a private realm? No, personal is political. Family has no business to claim its right to oppress women. Today, Urvashi Bhutalia's article in the Indian Express celebrating the arrival of young women activists whom the whole oppressive system should be afraid of. What I'm saying is, but that is the question which will take me to very deep philosophical debates about the realm of the private and the public. But you should pursue that. But today I will take up 4 concrete questions to advance this argument and promote a research agenda and a discourse agenda among our friends and colleagues that we need to examine this, question this notion of the private at a high pedestal. I mean, when my Marxist friends leaving DU, JNU, joining Ashoka and Jindal, and I'm sorry, many of them are very close friends of mine, because I know they have become very uncomfortable under the BJP takeover of the public universities. So the why private is being celebrated, and that's what we are discussing today. 4 concrete questions. 1, does the state represent the public? We should examine that question. The answer is not just yes or no, it's more complicated. We have to, please remember, my students, we have to continuously problematize, historicize, concretize, theorize, problematize, historicize. You know, that whole cycle of simultaneous methodological exercise in our knowledge pursuits. So we'll do that. Second question, is it not always that public is appropriated, rather misappropriated by some who use the term public, but actually pursue their narrow, often oppressive interests, exploitative interests, but they speak in the name of the public? Again, mostly, yes, it is always appropriated, but how the struggle in history has gone on against that appropriation, that also has to be noted. Third, can the discourse in the public or the celebration of the public counter the criticisms leveled against state? That public is less efficient, less actually more secretive, but claims to be transparent, highly costly, not cost effective, prevents innovation, it is so bureaucratic, red tape, and so on. Again, my answer is yes, the public can counter those criticisms, and this is the critical argument I am making, that the notion of the public, which we have associated with Soviet practice or some authoritarian practice here and there, or centralized practice in capitalist countries where they have continuously demonstrated the ineffectiveness and the corruption and the many limits of the public to celebrate the private. And now we know how the civil servants and the how the civil servants, as soon as they retire or even prior to retiring, join the private sector, or while in service they become allies or advisors and so on, and claiming to propose lateral entry from private sector to public and so on. So we have to counter. I said yes, we can counter. Yes, it's a difficult exercise, because this whole history of the last 300 years, colonialism, neocolonialism, neoliberalism, has really made it so difficult to prove that public can be participatory, decentralized, transparent, and self-governing at every level. Indeed, the Ubuntu concept of public can counter all the criticisms. That is my third argument. And finally, the fourth question is, do we have people's traditions all over the world which provide resources to celebrate the public, the commons, the kota, the common, the kung in Chinese, and in each one of your language, you should find out what is the public in your own language. In Odia,
it's 18 hours.
In Odia, it is Sarva Sadharana. That is why Sarva, this is part of the global tradition. And there are similar traditions I can illustrate in China on some occasions. but I don't know other traditions. Those who know about the Persian tradition, they should explore the other indigenous traditions in Africa, Latin America, Jharkhand, in the Zapatista areas in Mexico, and so on, because there is a tradition. So very briefly, these 4 questions. I know I'm very fast covering my time, and Priyanka, Sakshi, do warn me when I'm done with half an hour, okay? 1 second. The first question, does the state represent the public? We must know the notion of the state as a power structure, reflecting the social power structure in the political power structure, that is the state. And the electoral system which elects a government of that state is but one method of exercise of power. It is one of the many arenas of struggle, the elections and electing a government. And therefore election is important, but we must know no government represents more than 30% or 40%, even if it is more, you see, of the population. And this is why we insist that the minority opinion in democracy must be respected. And even a parliamentary majority government must respect. I mean, whether you saw a demonstration of it yesterday in the meeting between the Prime Minister and the J&K political party leaders, I'm not sure. But the attempt for gaining a consensus is crucial to democracy. And the majority representative must realize that it cannot represent Sarva, because it has interests and it is guided by many, many kinds of interests. And therefore, the struggle in elections, in people's movements, revolutionary struggles of all kinds, in cultural realm, in struggles over economy, in particularly in the cultural realm, poetry, theatre, film, the struggle for legitimation of the government and the state power, and in India, we notice that so clearly. I mean, we are noticing it even in Congress regime now, in the BJP regime. So these are all realms of legitimation and struggle over legitimation. So state is an arena of struggle there, and especially when it claims to be represented in one layer, the central government. I mean, I was amazed when Arvind Kejriwal was questioned by somebody saying that he doesn't represent India. I mean, does the president or the prime minister represent India? Who? I mean, you should have humility. They do, depending on the context. But nobody can arrogate this. It is a highly layered power structure, you see. Therefore, public and the state should not be equated. Public ownership and state ownership are surely not the same. And this is what is mistaken to be so. And then suddenly they decide to privatize all state-owned, whether it is Air India or railways. And there is a Ministry of Disinvestment, Ministry of Privatization. Just as they had a Ministry of Empowerment and Social Justice, now they have Ministry of Disinvestment, now it is called something else, more or less privatization. Therefore, and just see, state has withdrawn from the realm of welfare and productive realms, welfare realms, particularly health, education, welfare, housing, basic amenities of life, and has concentrated on public order. So state means NIA, state means Enforcement Directorate, state means police, and things like that. Even though COVID demanded state investment in public infrastructure, during the NEP, we did not hear of common school system. It is a privatization scheme, national education policy. Every policy indeed showing privatization. So this is the answer to equating state with the public. It must not be equated. It must be problematized, historicized, concretized, and theorized, and again problematized. Is it not always appropriated? Yes, it is always appropriated by upper classes, of higher castes, patriarchal interests, dominant races, and in India, it's very, very blatant. And in other cases, the Black Lives Matter has raised this whole question. Just this last week on the 19th, they celebrated the Juneteenth when slavery was abolished. Its implementation was implemented finally, 1865. And Black Lives Matter raises these questions about who represents the state apparatus, police, and so on. So yes, the white in America, the Brahmanic capitalists in India, patriarchal interests all over the world, they misappropriate the notion of the public. They use the notion of the public, and you can get many, many examples. I will not elaborate. It's always misappropriated. But the struggle goes on in the name of the public, in the name of the Sarva, that how can you talk about Sarva all and do this and then give only patrimonial, gingerly symbolic support. Pradhan Mantri Anna Yojana, Indira Awas Yojana, like that. Very, very symbolic things. Free ration for 3 months, now 6 months or a little more, and so on. No. Basic right to food to everybody. And those who do not have, they must have. You have to ensure that. Therefore, the disadvantaged sections must have the focus through a variety of measures. Only then it can be Sarva, the public interest. The third question: can public be efficient, innovative, creative, risk-taking? All the criticisms that are given against public, we have to, approach it very strongly, directly, and not defensively. Very, very important. That, yes, it can be effective, because it should not be centralized, bureaucratic, red tape-oriented, inefficient. There are many, many ways, technologically, humanly, provided you respect labor, all kinds of labor, manual, mental, all kinds of labor, and don't have this kind of distinction that you have between, through gradation and degradation of labor and economies. Agriculture is less important than industry, services are more important than manufacturing, that kind of. Therefore, it's very important to counter that argument. Then let's spend some time. Have I spoken for half an hour, Sakshi, Priyanka? I think I have.
Sir, you still have around 5 minutes for half an hour.
How many minutes more?
5 minutes and it will be
5 more. Okay, good. So that's my final point about knowledge system. Now, why do we say socialism is our goal or communism is our goal? Society, commune is, the whole society is a commune, and at the same time, each layer is a commune, especially the smallest layer. And Sarvodaya, not Antodaya. They talk about Antodaya, this patrimonial little thing to the last person in the line, and so on. That the whole discourse onto the scheme from Janata regime to today. We want Sarvodaya and all the disadvantaged groups, especially addressed to achieve Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pasyantu, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pasyantu. After that,
Sarve Santu Niramaya.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great thing. It has nothing to do with the Hindu ritualistic thing. It's a concept which was no doubt devised by the Brahminic elite to fool the people, but it's a claim that has to be realized, has to be an instrument of struggle. Now, therefore, the existing knowledge systems, particularly the neoliberal knowledge system, which is the mainstay of our pedagogy, global pedagogy, has to be contested, and the creative theory colloquium is quite capable of taking up these questions and confronting the neoliberal pedagogical challenge and the knowledge system challenge, because it has implications for the next 100 years or more. Last 300 years have shaped this, citadel of the celebrated private, the struggling tradition from anti-colonial struggle till today, from Marx, Gandhi, Ambedkar onwards, and the feminist struggle, environmental struggle, human rights struggle, above all over the world, have emphasized the new need, and the COVID-19 has really illustrated. It has provided many examples and many tools it has given to us to use them to pursue the idea of the sarva, the welfare of all, and the mutuality of welfare, and the real meaning of that famous term, freedom of each, is the precondition for the freedom of all. And that is the notion of sarva that we must aim at. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sakshi, will you?
Thank you, sir. Now I think we're going to progress to a question and answer session. So anybody who has any questions could raise their hand or type it in the chat box, and we would relay that information on the discussion. Hello? Yeah. So are there any questions for Professor Mohanty?
I think we have a lot of young scholars, young students have joined. I think they might be having a lot of questions. If we can start from them.
Sure.
Paramita, I don't know, Paramita Bhuya is where, whether she is here or not. She has written her thesis on neoliberalism and I think NRLM. And she has dealt with at length on some of the important issues that you have raised. Is Paramita there? I think she might have internet connection. Okay.
She is there, it seems. Her name is there. Paramita Chakravarti, right?
No, Paramita Bhuya.
Bhuya, acha, it's Aprita Chakravarti.
Okay.
You can start, I mean, we can start, then they can gradually come.
Can I ask?
Ms. Shalya.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Mohanty, for your talk. It's a basic concern that, at least in India, we have a philosophy behind for free vaccine. But unlike in the West, where I'm not sure if there is a philosophy, they have been able to provide free vaccine. So I'm unable to understand that how does philosophy work here? Because we clearly have failed. I paid for my vaccine. A lot of my friends did, but similarly, my colleagues who are from France didn't have to. So I want to understand how does then the role of philosophy play over here, because we come from a very long tradition of that. So that's my concern. Thank you.
I think, Shailaja, you should try to answer it yourself.
Yes, sir.
May I ask a theoretical question? Just pose a question, rather. I would like to know if our expectations of a public space is still valid. Should we be thinking unthinkable, for example? It is very much related to new authoritarian state systems or global system that is developing today. It will be linked to the level of technology that will develop and that has developed, with which the state, which is the subconscious of the state with which it works. I mean, do you think that it is simply nostalgic for us to think that there would be a public space where liberal notions of mutuality, for example, will work? Or are we into a different system? Is the pandemic a warning that there is a systemic transformation of our relationship with the state and with ourselves is on platter now?
Again, I would like you to reflect on a possible answer to that. Because I want to first see, what kind of thoughts you have, whether you can collectively find some responses.
So can I raise a few questions? Yeah, I think this is very interesting. And when you have mentioned about how to counter the kind of appropriation of the public has been going on and being run by the neoliberal forces, the fundamental question I think we have to ask, to what extent the alternative imagination has been innovative. I am speaking it from the very context of the experiences that we have been having at the grassroots. For example, in Assam, when we look at the elections, the neoliberal forces have been so innovative in terms of electoral agenda and so on and so forth. Particularly, and so I remember that the lecture you delivered in the Bimba Deori Memorial Lecture in 2003, when you talked about creative self and the obsessive self, and you referred to creative self in the context of the ethnic movements in the region. Now, BJP, one of the very important agendas on the part of BJP has been to co-opt or accommodate the very tribal ethnic forces who otherwise, was providing a kind of, or giving a sense of alternative to the authoritarian, very centralized federal polity. And it has been done in a very, very creative way. And we have some ethnic organizations here who pursued a left-leaning political agenda for quite a long time. Now they have become part of the BJP's agenda and has been telling that if we look at the experience of the past, we find that this regime has been providing us a space which has been denied for decades together by the Indian state or the forces of the Indian state. And therefore, my question is that you have a very, very innovative, neoliberal, rightist agenda, and compared to that, the agenda being pushed by the alternative forces, alternative imagination, has been non-innovative, has been not that wide to counter these forces. I'm not very sure whether I'm right or wrong, but that is my realization. The other question is, you asked about the public and the state. Now the question is this state a state or is this state an individual? For example, I was reading Sudha Pai in the context of UPA. Now, when they talk about neoliberal forces, talked about TINA, there is no alternative. But that there is no alternative has not been confined with only to in the context of the political economy. Now, there is no alternative has also been taken to the level of the person. There is no alternative in India except for Modi in the context of India, and there is no alternative in the context of this person in this particular state. That innovative dimension, I think, needs to be critically interrogated and addressed.
All right.
Can I? Lalan?
Lalan, yeah.
Yeah. Indeed, always it's a fascinating to listen Professor Mohanty. When I was a student in 1997, he came to Punjab University to deliver a lecture. It's been a long journey. I was just listening carefully. One question was buzzing in my head. Can we say cynicism as a region? Cynicism as a region. If you try to look down the history, around 200 years of political thought and political theory, there have been ups and downs. That doesn't make us to believe whatever is happening is something inescapable. So, Professor Mohanty, my question is, this anxiety and dilemma, which is always has been a kind of creative force to look forward for an alternative. So where does this creative self habitate? Certainly it habitates for me in Kisan Andolan. Howsoever, we might say that it's a bourgeoisie, petty bourgeois of Punjab and Haryana, they are the one who are marching, and the liberal class are not part of that, movement. But, they also generate a hope, a counter cynicism, which so-called this Modi mania or the Modi phenomena has been created. So to me, they can't be very neat and clean theoretical alternatives. But that's what, Professor Randhir Singh used to tell us when we used to celebrate Marx's birthday in Coffee House in Punjab University. Look, theory is muddied, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have an insight. I want, sir, your words on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, one more, and then I may respond to in some ways.
So there are some questions in the chat box also.
Okay, you can
Sakshi can read out, and then Sir can address this first round of questions. Then there could be the second round.
Thank you, sir. So the first question is by Dr. Pankaj Bora. Sir, will complete dependence on government for vaccine and medical services create a delay in universal vaccine program? Government should provide us free vaccines, but we don't have enough infrastructure for that. Though we may have enough funds and willing. A parallel private vaccine program has helped in speeding up the vaccination program. The second question is by Suhasini Das Gupta. Sorry. The question is, vaccine inequity has once again raised the problem of intellectual property laws, yet even a global pandemic has failed to move substantially. How can we utilize the experiences of the pandemic to re-evaluate, problematize, historicize, and theorize the challenges posed by the neoliberal order, which resists any attempt to challenge intellectual property laws? Suhasini is from Miranda House, Delhi University.
Okay. I thought we'll follow a method of each questioner also trying to answer for his question or reflect upon that. But let me try. Shailaja's question about U.S. distributed is free. In fact, most developed countries distributed is free. That doesn't make it respect the public. They have resources, and the view of the president was that they had the resources. They could easily give free vaccine to everybody. Not only that, they had, they hoarded some 75%, many times more than their need. So that's one. But they would not make universal health care as a fundamental right. They would not, they are still going to try for Obamacare at best. Just to give you an example. Therefore,
there's an echo in the voice. Can Ashish switch off his mic, mute his mic? It's okay.
Okay, all right. So, so the free vaccine is a good example of possibilities, but it is not a reflection of the character of the system. Okay, this is the important thing. Let me take this Amresh's question that with the private manufacturers in India, we could get more. We, of course, we can get more. The whole system in India was geared towards having just one very small number of public drug manufacturers, but large number of globally famous private manufacturers. Now that became the strategy of capitalist development in many, many spheres here in India. What I'm saying is large enterprises, efficient enterprises can also be held by held under such ownership systems which is not privately owned by one house, one individual, in frameworks of property concentration. This is the point. Therefore, you should look at the nature of the system. Indeed, we have to require all forms of cooperative action, individuals, groups, the so-called private entrepreneurs. How to have arrangements where they limit their profit, and on the other hand, public increase their profit to some extent, that both actually maximize the welfare of the common, welfare of the people as a whole. This is the conceptual point we have to see. So that's about entrepreneurship and ownership. Now, Savita, the public space taking over, well, in fact, I'm also excited by the farmers' movement. If you want an immediate example of how public space has been taken over by a movement which has given tantrums to the central government, you can see that on the borders of Delhi. What I'm saying is, and that together with the Tina question of Akhil, you see, the whole strategy of capitalist and neoliberal propaganda is to say that there is no alternative. And the so-called public space, they would say, is actually, a bureaucratic space, some family which is dominating a government, managing the whole government in conjunction with some favored capitalists, the crony capitalists, and so on. And they really use this space already. so there is no public space, really. That's just not true. I think there are, because public space has been the basis for human civilization's growth. The shared space, shared resources, especially natural resources. And this privatization of oxygen now and making it absolutely necessary and then failing to provide and then leading to the killing of so many people. I think this is the result of a public health system which has collapsed, making inaccessible, making oxygen inaccessible. Okay, therefore, they have made us feel helpless that public space cannot be appropriated, cannot be retaken by the public, by the commons. And the commons have been so much privatized. I think this is exactly what I'm challenging. The colonial epoch's discourse and history has been challenged during the last 2 years. And we have to see it, even though the rulers are asking us to go back to their pattern of things as normal. Now, the appropriation of alternative imagination by the rulers, I think that's a very interesting question, Akhil. In other words, all the demands we were making of, the creative self-demands that we were making of ethnic movements, first either ethnic movements became parochial, more like obsessive self. There are so many examples all over the country, including in Assam, and then that is taken over by the BJP. Even Congress did that, but now BJP. So there is a competitive innovativeness, you can say, competitive creativity. Sorry, the test is that the real alternative is whether is actually it is of mutual interest, whether the reconciled, the collective interest of various identities and their economic, social, cultural, political demands are being met. So again, the apparent appropriation of the let us say the cultural symbols of the local communities, but real subjugation in power terms in the hegemonic framework of the rulers, the larger national rulers within their framework, without granting autonomy and decentralization and consensus politics, democratic politics at every level. And that is why we have to see what kind of alternative imagination they are appropriating. And the fight for imagination, the fight for creative self has to go on, and it is possible, and it is actually happening on the ground also in many places, including Assam. Cynicism as a reason. I have always been worried about such subjective explanations, Lalan, because cynicism has an objective base also. You know that if there is widespread disappointment, optimism is less because of the pandemic, the dead bodies, so many of our friends, colleagues, relations, people in the country, in the world suffering and so on. But look at the way the news is being manipulated and how symbols are being created. So there is sometimes false optimism, then there is some real stories of help and optimism. So we have to really seek the objective conditions. Why people felt helpless people felt that no, there is no other alternative but this, and so on. We always felt such moments have come in history and have been overcome. If you look at various points in history, whether it was post First World War, fascism, post Second World War, whether it was the Vietnam War or the various kinds of authoritarian systems which have emerged right now, they're propagating this notion of no alternative, but we have to question that. Finally, the IPR question. In fact, I had a whole point about that. The pandemic has really illustrated the absolutely urgent necessity of questioning the concept of IPR, intellectual property rights, based on which the WTO is constructed. Even the request of some of the developing countries, including India, to withdraw the IPR restrictions so that the vaccine technology becomes a public good has not been accepted yet. This is the time we should question how privatization of knowledge, of discoveries, of innovations has been treated as accumulation of private property. The law of primitive accumulation has taken over the whole knowledge industry and science, technology. I'm very amazed. The Chinese philosophers should really see that all their innovations, they are reporting that they have now got maximum IPR certificates because of so many innovations. You should say that this should be the common property of the whole world. They should have free access. The whole world should have free access. But because they are afraid that it will be misappropriated by their competitors, in other words, the same game of secretive, competitive, capitalist technology. And McAfee died yesterday, but from McAfee to the even more sophisticated hackers in the computer market today. If that is your goal, unfortunately, there is no end to it. So we have to see, no doubt, the transition has to take into account so many arenas of responsibility, accountability, how to regulate so that indeed it becomes a public property, how to at least gradually unfold the property rights system in the sphere of knowledge, science and technology, because the definition of civilization process is the IPR. So how many IPRs which country has? You see, and this high tech as the latest phase of the Silicon capitalism in the history of world civilization, meaning world capitalism. That is the definition. Therefore, thank you, Suhasini, for raising that question. In fact, this period has challenged us to question knowledge as a property right in the theory of primitive accumulation. Thank you.
So we can have a second round of questions.
Sure.
Okay. Is there someone who? Okay. Ashish Ghosh has raised his hand. So, sir, if you could unmute, sir. Thank you.
This is an observation. Well,
So your voice is echoing.
I'm at home. I'm out. This all right?
No, sir, not yet.
I will mute myself, then it will be other mute. Okay.
Problem, sir.
So there is a lot of intervention in
Voice is not coming. Yeah.
but now not
No, sir, I think there is a problem with the mic.
oh, I'm sorry. I won't take time.
talk to Professor Mohanty later. Yeah, I can share it now. Go. Hello.
Ashish has given up.
Yeah, something wrong.
There is something wrong with the network.
Please write your question so that we can get it.
I try it. I'm in a mobile, right?
You can send it to anyone.
Okay, up now. Timing. Let me to write.
Meantime,
And Ashish, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay. May I ask?
yeah. Dhananjay.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for reminding us and then the concept of claiming server in the context of pandemic and also in context of neoliberalism. I think the problem is also at the different level. What we see as a Hindutva is a combination of Savarkar plus liberalism and liberal institutionalism. And when responding and encompassing people in terms of appealing towards it, it has modified from keeping Savarkar core plus liberal institutionalism. And the alternative politics has not innovated enough in terms of redefining the political outside the liberalism. As long as we keep defining our the concept of political within the framework of liberalism, and I don't think that we can defeat or we can even think of defeating Hindutva politics, because they have completely monopolized Hindutva plus liberal institutionalism. So I find this is quite interesting enough, the concept of Sawa in terms of thinking the political beyond the purview of liberalism. Thank you, sir.
Manindra.
I will try to give an imminent critique of your thought process. I mean, of course, we all agree with most of the things that you have said. But in order to think more deeply, I have two questions. One is that when you are on the one hand demanding creating a new public which is relatively autonomous from the state, more cooperative, more shared public, where you are also intending to suggest that we should transform our relationship with nature and the ownership pattern should change. We should transform our relationship with the knowledge that we create, which of course is a collective process. It is not an individual process. So individual property right, intellectual property right is a contradiction in term. So on the one hand, you are suggesting that. On the other hand, I think your argument is not transcending the centrality of the state. But I mean, if we are imagining a new philosophy for the future, any new philosophy for the future, I think, has to transcend two things. And this is what I'm quoting you actually, and on one at least, that is industrial revolution ethos. I'm borrowing your word. Concept. Industrial revolution ethos was one of the reasons of collapse of Soviet Union, because they did not transcend that. So if you are suggesting that we have to transcend industrial revolution ethos, then we also have to transcend the idea of the centrality of the state itself. What could be the new kind of social formation? Because I think what Savita is raising, or what Akhil is also suggesting, we are not even questioning that idea. The only person in last few decades, or maybe last century, who was questioning this idea was Gandhi, that transcend the idea of state itself and create cooperatives among yourselves so that even the state can't intervene. Even the state becomes minimal state. You don't need that. And for that, we need to have a new kind of morality, which is not based on the idea of greed, that we, the human beings, are basically greedy beings. And that is the 14th century formulation that made capitalism possible. Can we tilt that? Can we say that greed is dead, and therefore now we have to have new organizing principle of society where we generously believe in Ubuntu, and we genuinely believe in Ubuntu, and we believe in giving, or what Savita wants to write a paper on Seva as the organizing principle of society. So can we transcend the whole thing entirely without transcending the centrality of the state? That is my precise question to you.
You had a second question?
I will come again, I think.
Okay.
I had a related question, if I may, just to add to what Manindra is saying, that we have to also realize that the factor of technology, for example, technology of power, technology of governance, all of these things are now very much central to any new theorization of state or public space. For example, is the space that we imagine as public space, which is very much parasitical, or it is dependent on the notion of freedom to associate, to mingle, to deliberate. It is linked with our notions of citizenship, for example. All right, so the public space now, which is very much surveilled, and public space which state may not fear anymore, because the state is in control of that space much more than it ever was. It is in this sense that I'm talking about a renewed way of looking at the significance and political relevance of public space. That is what I meant to say.
Maybe I can come with the second question again.
Yeah.
That is that.
You must be realizing I'm also taking a little rest.
Okay. Yeah. So within the given framework that we are operating in, that the neoliberal framework and the existing property regime that we are facing, within that, can we argue for free vaccination? Because this would mean then that free vaccination for everybody, including somebody who has huge property. So what could be the legitimate reason for suggesting that those who can spend so much money on their otherwise health care, they should also be given free vaccination? And that is something that any layman would ask. That, because the logic at the moment seems to be quite convincing. That is, that we are selling costlier vaccines to some people so that we can provide it free to other people. So, and if given the system that we are in, if we think of using this moment as a critical moment to theorize something for future, that I can absolutely understand. But within the given system, it seems to be very difficult to comprehend that. Third thing that, and I would rather extend Akhil's question, in fact, why people are joining private universities. I was talking to many young students, apart from salary and other things, that is not so odd. Delhi University not providing jobs, so many people, good people, have migrated to those universities. I think there is one interesting thing, and which could be a critical point for the failure of the state system. That is, state institutions do not provide enough creative space. one of the reasons why we needed to have this kind of institution outside where we can freely discuss is that our university systems have stopped providing that space, and not in 1 or 2 years, since long. It is not, I mean, I remember this before this regime came, that we wanted to organize something in DCRC. That was a discussion on a professor who was arrested for getting for involvement in Kashmir, and Vice Chancellor stopped us from doing that. So within university, different regime, a progressive Vice Chancellor told us that you can't do it there. So since then we started rethinking, censoring ourselves whether we should organize things or not. So that space is shrinking and is not available. Therefore, we needed, and it is so hierarchized. It's such a big hierarchy that a powerful hierarchical system that you create, that the moment you enter in the room provided by the state, you start feeling that oppressive hierarchy on yourself, so you can't freely talk about things. I remember Rajni Kothari, when I was taking him to DCRC, he asked me that, well, finally Manoranjan has thought of creating an institute outside the department. I said, yes, but why are you saying that? We said, because I kept arguing for it long back, and he always, this group, the left group, always said that, no, we have to democratize the department, and we should not really think of creating space outside. I don't know whether it's true or not, but that's what he told me. So is it that the private sector, the way the private universities are providing more space for creativity, and it's less hierarchized? Of course, there are examples of Vice Chancellor resigning due to pressure, but maybe that is temporary. Maybe that will they will have some method of handling it. So how do you look at that?
Add to what Monindraji has said. Now we know that the legitimacy of the incumbent regime was completely eroding. Now, once the demand for universal vaccination came up, and government finally conceded to it, has it also not contributed towards regaining the legitimacy that this government was gradually eroding? In other words, what we claim to be a victory for the public has also been the victory of the very institutions which has been appropriating the public.
Can I?
Yeah.
Can you see now?
Ashish, you have to speak from a little distance, maybe.
Is it all right now?
Better.
Okay, the distance. I would like to add point to what you said about creative. Now,
Sorry, sir.
no. Okay.
Sir, could I say something?
Now, Priyanka should also mute herself. Yeah.
Sir, could I take what you're saying something? Just a small interjection. So I listened to what Professor Manindranath Thakur was saying, but aren't private universities by design very hierarchized on who can and cannot enter those institutions in the first place? Even with scholarships and fellowships, the student body which enters those institutions still remains. Yes, it still remains very strongly based on class slides. So, and then the second worry that I have over here, other than just professors finding spaces to communicate more freely outside the state's glare, if I could say that, would be this the idea of the eminent institutions that has recently come up. And then you have this Reliance University, which has already gotten this tag, which has no land, which has no university space yet. So won't private universities also then become a place of propagandist politics even more, where now like something uh, like how Teachers Day, I know this is a very minute example, but how Teachers Day in the schools has changed. From us talking about Radhakrishnan, we've started having a long interaction of the Prime Minister with the young people of the country. So the propaganda then started at this young level in schools at primary classes, which has already begun. So then university space also, when it becomes private, and then you have the state then favoring certain private universities, others. So I feel like it's not a one-off case where the VC retired under pressure. It's a designed space, and even this private space outside the state control isn't really that outside the state control that we would want it to be. So that's all I had to say. Are there any more questions? I don't think so.
We can have another round of it. We can have another round of it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Can I add regarding private university 1 or 2 words? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Dhananjay, go ahead.
Yes, regarding I think what private university does, and I use Mauguise's 2 technical terms, they propagate repressive desublimation. And there is something called repressive desublimation. And I mean, you have poetry, but poetry without substance. And secondly, there is a repressive tolerance. And this is another thing, and that has been ensured in all private university through concrete depoliticization. So the space available, of course, the state available within the state-led university is a very challenging and difficult thing every day. And everyone, and I'm in Gujarat, I encounter every day what the university system is and what it stands for. But the private university is a complete hoax in a sense that they depoliticize being at the level of even politics. That is my observation about private universities.
So unmute yourself.
So you have to
unmute
unmute.
yourself. Yeah.
Okay. I think the first I'll take Dhananjay's first question. Are we still operating within the liberal framework? And actually, Manindra's emphasis that unless we transcend the state centric analysis, we cannot present a powerful theory that's capable of confronting and overcoming the present dilemma. I think we have to formulate this question differently. In history, both institutional changes, even across revolutionary changes, even in the context of great revolutions, and in ideas, is always, the combination of the emerging innovation and the sort of fully blossomed new product. So the capitalisms, I mean, this is a very common example of what capitalism and bourgeois democracy had earlier, in its early phase, achieved, and then claimed. The whole notion of equality, liberty, anti-feudal values, and so on. And then what new hierarchies it created, new exploitations it generated. Similarly, the newly developed countries including the revolutions. I mean, I very often wonder why the neoliberal experiments, economic, cultural, and scientific experiments in China, even under Xi Jinping, where there is a re-emphasis on communist ideology, why is it flourishing? It has many origins. First, the United Front with Kuomintang in course of the revolution in one period. Then, even though they had a fight against the Kuomintang, 46 to 49, and then came to power, New Democracy actually used the, within quote, patriotic bourgeoisie, national bourgeoisie, to become partner in construction. Even though there was a reaction, and then there was this commune, greatly forward, full nationalization, and so on. So this struggle was going on. In other words, please remember, the old systems, certain things, the new rulers find useful, and they continue with that. And this is far more so in India, the bureaucracy, the army, the education system, the health system, all that, hangover from the colonial period. I gave you the extreme example of China. And there were similar examples in Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union also. Therefore, you have to work with liberalism as well as socialism of the future, the communist idea of the future. In other words, you have to that the whole time scale of knowledge development and ideological development without seeing such dichotomous breaks so sharply. And therefore, alternative politics has to be rooted in that complexity of transition and overcoming consciously what you inherit. I mean, the Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina, I every day chant it. Even after becoming a Marxist, I said, because I grew up chanting it with my father, then my elder brother, the sannyasi, and so on. Then I decided to say that, I don't have to be a religious Hindu to subscribe to Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, or some of the slokas I also have changed to transmit to others. I will not go into that. So what I'm saying is, this cultural upbringing, how we transform the culture. Yes, we want to break. Ambedkar warned us about that. You have to break, but also use culture to overcome it. Both are very necessary. Same with liberalism. So the concept of Sarvodaya, communism, socialism, and Ubuntu have to be located in that larger dialectical complexities of historical processes and transitions, even with radical futures. I don't consider utopia as a negative thing. Even our futuristic utopian, the positive alternatives in mind. Okay, I think Malindra raised a question which I should have elaborated in my. Indeed, I believe that unless you transcend the Industrial Revolution paradigm of capitalism, you cannot fight the state, you cannot fight for an alternative development and transformative path. And more than anything else, COVID experience has taught us, I think, along with these three fault lines, the positive thing is how nature has given us back this punishment through the virus, because we have neglected nature. And therefore, the alternative to barbarism, that's socialism, as Rosa Luxemburg put it, has that the harmony with nature as a critical definition of socialism and communism and the Sarvodaya in the future. But transcending the state has to be done with recognition of the state, not wishing away the state. You have to fight the police through enacting new laws, expose the non-implementation of the laws, like any of you are doing that. You have to fight the state by exposing its capitalist bias and crony capitalism. You have to fight the state, even the Hindutva state, which the the Savarkarite neoliberal state, which celebrated constitution on the one hand, civil liberty and democracy on the other, but Ram Temple and all that going on in the Hindutva agenda of things. So recognize the state, fight against state to overcome it. What many of our forces did, while recognizing and in the parliamentary process of fighting, they got absorbed in it. And that was the challenge of many revolutionaries to others. That is why when you use the concept of the commune and against the state, concept of Gram Swaraj against the state, concept of the community self-governance, of the Zapatista against the centralized capitalist, and now neoliberal surveillance technocratic capitalist state. You have to recognize it, see its operation without being taken over by it. Now, therefore, the new kinds of framework beyond greed, of course, and that is why it's so important to have that Gandhian frame built into the Marxist socialist frame. Very important. But even that is not enough. Ambedkarite, feminist, so many other elements. But that comprehensive critique of neoliberal state and its constantly innovative technology, and yes, that takes me to technology. I have sometimes emphasized the fact that the fight in technology is technology for what and for whom. That is why intellectual property right is an instrument of capitalism. And you have to fight and overthrow the IPR regime so that knowledge is shared. Otherwise, only secretly, whether it is the revolutionaries or the terrorists, they grab the hacking technology or the striking technology or the 9/11 technology or whatever. Sorry, it has to be a global commons, shared, debated, and commonly accepted usage pattern, so that it is indeed for the common good and not for sectoral good, not for anybody's becoming an instrument of domination. Otherwise, technology will be used by all contending forces for contending objectives. This is very important. The politics of technology and politics of knowledge has to be a continuing subject of investigation, as our group has emphasized from day one. Therefore, yes, that very challenging question finally from Akhil. Free vaccine has increased the legitimacy. Like legitimacy of, you would say, Biden. Even Trump would have given free vaccine to all Americans. Or your suggestion that those who can afford to pay, they should pay. Sorry. First, you you accumulate, privatize, and grade property, and then air, water, light, and now instead of common school, you want a graded school. Those who can afford private school, why not allow them to have private school? No. Schooling, common schooling is a basic right of all humans. Basic health care is a human right of all. Basic access to health care includes vaccine for all. I'll be very upset if a crorepati's baby is given a polio vaccine which is priced. No, a crorepati's baby, all public hospitals, public and private hospitals shouldn't discriminate among crorepati's baby and a beggar's baby. Now, therefore, one has to give certain things free. But at the same time, you tax the rich on their wealth, get common funding for common resources. That's a different method. Now, therefore, this vaccine legitimation has to be exposed. In fact, I have used the free vaccine for all occasion to expose the neoliberal industrial revolution strategy of private accumulation of knowledge, property, and every common resource. Therefore, there is no question of using free vaccine as an instrument of legitimation.
May
you please slowly wind up. I'm getting tired slowly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Just one line. Would you think of a common school with differential payment? I mean, I have an example that my school was a common school. So there was, in the admission policy, nobody was discriminated. Anybody who was able to compete could get into the school. Once you get into the school, then you are differentiated in different income brackets, and you pay according to your capacity. How do you think of that?
I don't.
Sir, before sir, you respond. Let me give one example. For example, my university. Now, what happened that we had limited number of seats in the departments. There were a lot of demands. So universities started a scheme called paid seats. Now paid seats means whoever can afford, they can come and join. So if now public university is a common space, common institution, common property. Now if we accept Monindra's proposal, then we are going back to that, creating hierarchical structures.
No. What I'm saying is that anybody who competes or who gets through the normal routine law, you get admission. Once you are admitted, I mean, this is a dilemma that JNU people also face. We are public university, state is paying all the time, but my position would be, and at a risk of being very unpopular among the students, that if your liquor and cigarette bill is higher than your fellowship, then you should pay for it. I mean, people don't like my comment, but I'm surprised. Why should public money be, I mean, in this given, I would agree with you if you transcend the frame entirely, but within the given framework, let there be all hospitals as government hospitals, all schools as government schools. But within that, let there be differential payment if same service at different cost depending your income. What is the problem with that?
Lot of problems.
Sir, I have to say one thing.
Sorry.
Yes.
Can I add one point? And as Mani sir has invited that to unpopularity, why this is, sir, I think rather than why should we not demand 80% taxation on rich people? that at the policy level. That would be more appropriate, because essentially students do not have class. We don't understand students from class perspective, and students can't be categorized as a class per se. So if we are not saying that students are from class per se, here a differential payment or fee structure would create problem. That is my submission.
Why should it? If you get in students who have large number of them have paid heavy amount for their school education, when they come to JNU, they don't pay. So if you are accepting that system there, then what is the problem in this?
So tax their parents. I mean, maximum 80%.
No, of course you are taxing, but
No.
if you, I mean, that is another kind of problem. That's another kind of domain when you can go and discuss within this given system. If you tax more, then what will happen, how it will happen, that's a different thing. But the point is that when we are, I mean, unless we, my problem is that unless we agree with that, we will not be able to make public institutions. We are not able to. Within this given system, there's no other logic through which you can create public systems.
So,
My
I
argument
remember
is,
the coffee house discussion.
Sakshi.
I remember the coffee house discussion with Professor Manindranath in the during the peak of the movement that was happening in JNU. We had this lively debate, and I would just like to bring in a question that Saurav had raised at that time. He had said that what happens then when he was paying more fees comes to the library and says, "I am owed this seat more than somebody who's paying less," and where does those class hierarchies then, how do they get resolved? So those practical questions then, how are they catered to?
No, my answer would be that there is no hierarchy. Once you are there, you have to pay, and that doesn't mean anything. I mean, your payment system will not define your position in the university. Nobody can claim more because one is paying more.
But they would come with a baggage. Sir.
But
Yes.
Dharmendra, you remember in your school there was no baggage.
No, there was. Some people thought we. I'm sorry.
It was never accepted.
Let me say
Anyway,
let me say. But some people had baggage that we come from this background and we are paying too much. And if you remember, I think other people would not know that there was many people used to say kavarg as pejoratively. Those who are not paying, they were sucking the institutions. These kind of things were there also. And this kind of baggage, psychological baggage, they always used to carry with them. I think this would be, if ideally they don't carry, but you can't avoid in other institutions. People say, look, I have paid more. This kind of psychology they always carry with them.
So we have similar stigma with reservation, but we did not give up the reservation, and that doesn't make much difference.
That's different debate. And here I think we cannot compare these two. These two are
okay. I think
okay.
I would concede.
My whole argument is that this, it has been presented as either impractical or unattainable. Having this notion of really operative, democratic, effective publicness or public institutions, public action, public ownership, and we are contending, this argument is contending against that, and COVID gave us the context to question that. Just like having roads, you find money from various sources, by taxes and this and that, to create roads, and on the road, true, there also you discriminate among pedestrians, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, cars of various kinds, and trucks and so on. But a public road is accessible to all, and similarly, there are there will be elements of there will be arenas where people's differentiated talents can flourish in ways which actually are facilitated by these common facilities. Okay, a public institution, if it has, of course, it has to have some method of admission. I agree with that, but the method which fixes identities, fixes admission money, and we have to see ways of seeing that we are representing the identity, the oppressed identities or the oppressed sections. At the same time, once they are admitted, it is an atmosphere just like a common mess, the hostel, the access to the library, access to the classroom, how to create those conditions of reducing inequalities. Remember in Delhi University how difficult it was to introduce the Hindi medium. So many colleagues also opposed, and the university said, why are you doing something against the law? But we went ahead. We started tutorial classes to begin with, and then it became a public demand, and majority became. Then first it was possible to take examination in the Hindi medium, and then obligatory sections in Hindi medium with classes. So it's just a question of, I'm giving you one example. So how do you devise ways within a public framework to reduce inequalities? That is a whole new set of questions. But the commitment and appreciation of the need for need for public, that society as a whole is committed to, welfare of all through providing, basic rights to all. And basic rights include education, health, and housing, and we can talk about that, what kind of employment activity, employment facilities, and so on. So, the whole ideology that has grown during the last 200, 300 years. First, colonialism propagated this, then neocolonialism and the newly independent countries got subsumed under this capitalist frame. That's because Soviet model did not illustrate the true socialist vision, and not the Indian model illustrate the true Gandhi, illustrate any aspect of the Gandhian vision, except lip service here and there. And so the social movements in the last 4 or 5 decades have really raised many new questions which gave new meaning to Marxism, Gandhism, all isms, really. But because neoliberal capitalism is the dominant ideology still, and Marxism provides the most powerful ideological and epistemological critique, therefore we use Marxism as the powerful tool. But there are so many inadequacies in classical Marxism as well. Now, therefore, it is the sort of emphasis on the value of the public, value of collective good, and distinguishing it from the dominant perception of the negative perception of the public. That was the purpose of this exercise. And the discussion really enriched it further.
To I think we're running out of time because we're supposed to wrap it up by 7:30 and it's 7:25. So I would like.
Yes, we should wind up. Yeah,
to
yeah.
thank Professor
Yeah.
Mohan.
Yeah.
Who is winding
I
up?
would take this opportunity to thank. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody switch on your video and then we'll take a picture.
Somebody should take the photograph.
Yes, yes, I'm taking the photograph. Kindly switch on your camera.
Okay.
Priyanka,
Savita
you are
ji
talking
and
to-
others.
Avita,
And our students. We have a number of students from
oh,
my
Ananya in
department.
the picture. Ananya in the picture. Hey, Ananya, look at here. Look at this side.
Babu, photo tull lo.
Hey, boy.
Kak.
Now,
Come, Mati.
show your face.
Yes, take.
Hey. Rag is blushing.
Yes. I think Savita ma'am was not there.
Thank you, Ashish. Yeah, Savita.
Thank you very much. It was really very refreshing and new ideas came. I'm recalling of our DCRC days. In fact, prior to that, our Tuesday seminar days,
Right.
when Professor Chandok used to say always that I present everywhere in the world, but when I present in this group, I really fear that it will be ruthless.
Well, I was also nervous to tell you the truth.
So there is a small announcement, and we'll be having a live discussion conversation. Prashant and myself. I'll give you the link.
Oh,
It's
very
not
nice.
about only academics. It's journey from childhood to
Very nice.
yes.
I was just thinking of doing very nice, very nice, very nice. Actually.
Good. So I'll give you the link, and it will be great if you can watch.
Sure,
it.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure, sure.
I also
And
think
some
that
new friends have done today. Yeah. Sorry.
this intervention by Professor Mohanty is so timely, so much like him. No situation should go unexamined. We should reflect on it. You know, it's like it is this tradition that has made us into critical thinkers and academicians. Thank you so much, sir, for keeping this critical spirit still burning. We benefit by this.
It's because of you people only. it's running still.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
And thanks to
All right.
Priyanka and Sakshi.
Great.
They really were very nicely organized it. Thank you very much.
thank you.
We are looking
Thank you.
forward for more such Saturday seminars, which always used to, it's earlier used to be Tuesday seminars, which
Okay.
I call lifeline of our group.
I had to fix on Friday because tomorrow there is another
Yes,
one.
you told me.
First death anniversary of a revolutionary, Annath Patra. We are celebrating it as the solidarity for the farmers movement.
Okay.
So there are, a lot of people. So I'm in that. That was committed before. So
Fine, sir.
Okay,
So we can change the dates accordingly, but otherwise you should have once in a fortnight, definitely. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right. Yes. All right.
you have proved that I can still survive.
No, you have to for the group.
Yes.
And you can, and it's always nice, and you will recover very soon. All the best.
Yes.
Sir.
Yes. Good night. Good night, monitors.
sir.
Good night.
We're very hopeful
Bye.
to bring back new topics further. Thank you.